Cary Johnson is the executive director of the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. He's an author and activist with many years of experience in the LGBT movement and in African social and economic development. Before joining IGLHRC, Cary worked in management positions for Amnesty International USA, AfriCare, IGLHRC, and Planned Parenthood. Cary holds a master's degree in international affairs and a certificate in African studies from Columbia University, and has written numerous articles on gender and sexuality in Africa, including the acclaimed IGLHRC report titled Off the Map, How HIV/AIDS Programming is Failing Same-Sex Practice People in Africa. Before assuming the executive directorship, Cary was IGLHRC's Senior Africa Specialist, a position he held for 4 years, managing the organization's office in Cape Town, South Africa. Under his leadership, IGLHRC Africa program grew significantly and had an indelible impact on promoting human rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in the region. He's developed enduring partnerships with African LGBT, HIV, and human rights organizations that have been key to challenging arrests and abuse in numerous countries, including Cameroon, Nigeria, Uganda, and Senegal. Cary Johnson.
I'd like to invite everyone. I would never do this. Like presentation, but we're still viewing. So by all means, I was asked specifically to talk, sort of give a roundup of some of the LGBT rights issues that are prevalent in Africa. And I'm happy to do that. I was the coordinator of the Africa program before I became ED. And frankly, I'm really happy to be learning more about other parts of the world. I had a chance to travel to Latin America, to Asia, and to Europe. Actually, I was at Queer Pride in Budapest last year, which was an amazing thing to watch. The gay activists square off against skinheads. So I'm expanding, but Africa is still the base of my knowledge and where my main interests still lie. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about Africa, but I thought it would be great to start by showing IGLHRC's new video, which I think gives like a real overview of the work we've done over the past 20 years and some insights into the kinds of cases that we work on and the kinds of partnerships that we consider to be essential to the international LGBT rights movement. So, let's see if this did their job. Open, close, no. It's all right. So you did need a remote. Right. If there's no star, I don't know what you're saying. Each countries around the world, same-sex acts are criminalized in one way or another.
Today's marginalized LGBT folks around the world are routinely and brutally attacked, tortured, and even murdered.
There's a death penalty issue in many countries for just being gay or lesbian.
When someone is killed in Uganda because they've been imprisoned because of their sexual orientation, we have to respond to that. And we know how to respond to that. We've been doing it for the last 20 years.
We serve as an organization that is dedicated to the ability of every LGBT person around the world to be able to stand up, to be able to chart their own way, and to be able to fight for the rights that they are entitled to.
This is an organization that gets things done. And at the end of the day, we know that we are going to get our rights. It's just going to be a very long struggle.
They come to my home with a gun and they beat them and push them, and my 4 friends jumped from 7th floor to downstairs. And they have the handlock, the teeth going out, the head. I tell them I get a help from America with an organization whose name is IGLHRC.
years back that they were just assumed to be gay. We helped line up lawyers to represent them, and we ensured that their arrest would not go unheard in the world. We shocked the legal system because they just thought they could throw them in jail. Out of that situation came the first LGBT group in Canada. Sometimes we help by getting people out of the country for a time being. The threats are so extreme.
I was leading a discussion about health matters, mainly on countering AIDS, and the police found us together in my apartment and arrested us. They continuously beat us with clubs. I can say the whole listening to us. They simply said, you are LGBT people.
Then Abraham says, okay, should we mobilize international action around this? Should we mobilize a letter? Should we submit a report to the appropriate United Nations Council to address this?
Sometimes it's just letting somebody in those situations know that there's somebody who understands and is there to watch their back and is there to help them get through it.
The other part of it is that many local activists need support, they need logistical support, they need training, and this is what we provide consistently. We connect with them, we work with them in terms of documentation of human rights violation, in terms of publicity around the work that they are doing, and supporting their organization through providing trainings and financial resources.
La primera vez que conocí a IGLHRC fue en el instituto y debo reconocer que además era mi primera vez en preparación como activista. El instituto fue la base fundamental de lo que yo soy ahora, de lo que he logrado como líder.
Throughout the years we had the Felipe de Souza Award. Every year we acknowledge the work of one LGBT organization or an individual. Give them money that they can basically invest in their movement, but also arrange for them to meet with local activists here in the United States, basically do networking.
Our greatest achievement is our continued existence and the growing number of individuals who are stepping forward to say that our rights should not be limited or compromised anymore.
Another area that IGLHRC has had a tremendous impact has been at the United Nations itself, often a very complex and cumbersome body.
I would like to bring the special attention to the current situation in Uganda.
We need to go further, and he said, I'd love to see some specific language in UN treaties that guarantee protection from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. It's a good goal. Our organization started 20 years ago, and it really was the brainchild of our founder, Julie Dorff.
We were really started by a bunch of ragtag street activists and immigrants who really came out of that era in the late 80s and early 90s of ACT UP and Queer Nation to fight for LGBT rights in the United States. And our mission is only as good as our relationships were with groups on the ground. And our biggest success in that first period certainly was getting our issues on the tables of the international gay rights movement.
I think we've been involved in some of the major firsts in our community.
The very first asylum case based on sexual orientation was a lovely gay man from Brazil named Marcelo Tenorio. And Barney Frank, who was a big supporter early on, helped us connect with Janet Reno to ensure that that case would be elevated to a matter of precedent.
I think the people trying to settle this and I feel representative of people to get. We have the right to get folks working years ago. And the main time just in the house is Chinese people that I'm here to work with.
In 2001, the UN General Assembly had its very first meeting on HIV/AIDS. They had never discussed the issue before. And IGLHRC had been invited on the first day of that meeting. The countries of the General Assembly had actually moved to ban me from speaking because I represented a gay group. Overnight, we actually mobilized a campaign to reverse that vote.
It would be wrong, it would be deadly and disastrous not to place human rights at the center of our responses to the HIV/AIDS pandemic.
This was a turning point in the history of the UN, in the history of LGBT human rights advocacy, and in the history of the HIV movement.
I don't think we realized at the time how important some of the things we were doing, whether it was Amnesty International or the United Nations or the State Department, we just made our strategic choice and went for it. We were young.
Julie created an institution that's continued today, that's stronger than it's ever been,
International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission is supporting the route to our rights worldwide.
IGLHRC is front and center, working on the ground, hand in hand with local activists, the way really no other organization is doing.
IGLHRC's international network means that they are the connective link between those of us who don't want to help and the people who see it's absolutely essential and they weren't there to something that would be done.
IGLHRC works for the day when all human beings are valued and treated with dignity and respect. We work for the day when justice is a reality around the world for everyone.
Human rights for everyone.
For everyone. Para todo el mundo.
A comunidad. Everywhere.
Page, follow us on Twitter. Yeah, we just finished this, and actually In the Life worked with us on it. They did wonderful work. So it is like join our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter. Yeah, we just finished this, and actually In the Life worked with us on it. They did wonderful work. So it is our 20th anniversary. We just celebrated, and there's so many cases that the video mentions that I could talk about. One is the most relevant probably right now is that I got a call this morning at 4 o'clock, the phone rang, and it was Monica Barrow, who's the director of our office in Africa, for sub-Saharan Africa. And she was calling to tell me that the case of two Malawian couple, you may have heard about this case, a transgender woman and her husband who were arrested in mid-December, and they have been consistently denied bail, contrary to Malawian law, and that today the judge was ruling in their case, and they've been bound over for trial. And will have to present a defense, and risk being sentenced to prison for 14 years in a country where it's almost impossible to find lawyers to defend them, where the media is that's set and ready to convict them. But the interesting thing that's going on in Malawi is there's a debate, within society. You've got people who are saying, let them go. We've got other things to worry about in this country. So there's an evolution going on, which is really what I find to be the most interesting. I think the case that I wanted to talk about that I think will maybe provide some examples of what some of the key issues are in Africa around protecting and ensuring rights is the case of the 17 people who were arrested in Cameroon in May of 2005. And there were 17 people arrested. They were sitting in an outdoor bar, sharing a drink one evening, and the bar, a bistro, if you will, it was known to be a hangout for LGBT people. And it wasn't just men, actually. There were 3 women who were arrested at the time as well. So sometime between the arrest and when these people actually were taken before a judge, several of them were able to sort of bribe their way out. So by the time the case actually went before a judge, there were 11 gay men who were prosecuted. And they were prosecuted under Article 347 of the Cameroonian Penal Code, which provides for 7 years in prison. Now, it's interesting to talk about the laws that exist in Africa. Almost every country has laws that can, one way or another, be seen as prosecuting transgender people because they are cross-dressing. And 2/3 of the countries have laws that specifically criminalize consensual same-sex acts. Often, the laws refer specifically to acts between men. Sometimes acts between women are, ignored, mainly because people assume that lesbians don't exist or don't have sex. And most of these laws were inherited from British colonial systems, though, interestingly, several Francophone countries do have laws that criminalize same-sex acts that they put in place sort of after the colonial period. France had already decriminalized homosexuality in the 50s and 60s, as most African countries began demanding achieving their independence. So most of the Francophone countries don't have sodomy laws. But believe you me, there are plenty of other laws under which they persecute and prosecute LGBT people. Laws like loitering, vagrancy, immoral acts. Pretty much, the government doesn't need laws if they really want to, silence you, criminalize you, and marginalize you. So the Cameroon case, it really typifies like some of the most important issues. As I said, 2/3 of the countries in Africa still have criminal laws against consensual same-sex sex. Cameroon is one of them. After these men were arrested, they were in prison for a little over a year. They were subjected to forced anal examinations. Now, this is a strategy that a number of governments use. It's been used in Uganda, it's been used in Egypt, it's been used in Senegal. And basically, in addition to humiliate, the main objective of it is to humiliate and to make you feel, already less than you already feel. And we've been working on the issue of forced anal examinations and these examinations have been proven to have absolutely no forensic value. I'm assuming most people in this room are gay. There's no, it shows nothing, particularly if you're in the insertive partner. How does that show anything about your sexual behavior? But governments use forced anal examinations as a way of humiliating, but also I don't know if there are lawyers in the room, but to be prosecuted under sodomy charges under most criminal law systems, you have to be caught in the act. And actually under Islamic law, you have to be caught in the act by a number of adult male witnesses to be prosecuted. And very, very infrequently are people actually caught in the act. What's more common is that people are arrested because of identity than they are arrested because of behavior. The police don't often break in to arrest people while having sex. They arrest you because you're hanging out in a night spot that's known to be frequented by LGBT people, or you're an activist and you're known for your activism, or you're an HIV prevention worker and you get arrested. So these forced anal examinations basically in our mind amount to torture, cruel and inhuman, degrading treatment. And that's one of the reasons that we're actually looking for some funding from the European Commission to do some work around torture, because we feel that torture and ill treatment, because we feel that's one of the ways in which men presumed to be gay and bisexual are often targeted by governments through this forced anal examination. The other thing this case sort of typified for us was the fact that there were no lawyers willing to work on the case. None. At the time, there was no gay and lesbian organization in Cameroon, so we tried to work on the case from New York. We contacted dozens of lawyers in Cameroon. One after the other said, no, we're not interested. No, we hope they stay in jail. No, we will help to prosecute them, but no one willing to take on the case. And that's, we find it sort of consistently in many countries. When 9 men were arrested in Senegal in December of last year, finding lawyers to represent them became a real challenge. And then what also happens is lawyers are just like kind of everyone else. They need to be paid, they have jobs. And the idea of pro bono legal service that we have here in the United States really doesn't translate to Africa. I don't know about in Latin America or other parts of the world, but there's no real tradition of pro bono legal service. I think maybe in Latin America it's developing more.
There are lawyers for activists, actually. So they do this activist work. And also there are lawyers appointed by the court. Like courts provide for state supported. There's a state supported system of accessible, free legal counsel.
Right.
So that's
yeah. In most parts of Africa, that's not the case. If you can't afford a lawyer, one will not be appointed. You will languish in prison. And this is not just an issue around gay and lesbian. this is an issue. I mean, there are, the majority of people who are in prison in Africa today are people who've been convicted of nothing. There are people they're men awaiting trial, women awaiting trial. People who've been in prison for 10, 15 years, but are just stuck in the system, and because they have no lawyers, to work on their behalf, they're just stuck in the system almost. So it's not just a problem for LGBT people, but there were no lawyers willing to work on their case. We finally found some lawyers willing to work on their case, and in the process, this amazing human rights defender by the name of Alice Kong, who was an older senior barrister in Cameroon, emerged and has become this incredible activist for our community, straight older woman. And because she's straight and because she's senior, an older woman, she had the space to, the political space, the personal space to be able to take on this very unpopular case. And in the process of her working on this case, and she's worked on other cases of gay men mainly who've been arrested, but also some young women be able to take on this very unpopular case. And in the process of her working on this case, and she's worked on other cases of gay men mainly who've been arrested, but also some young women who've been thrown out of schools in Cameroon because they were too butch. They've attempted to disbar her. Have you met Alice? Okay, they've attempted to disbar her. She's gotten threatening phone calls. It's the threat and the risk that lawyers take when they take on these cases is very real. It's not imagined. So there are no lawyers willing to work on the case. There are human rights movements, and very strong human rights movements in a lot of countries in Africa, including in Cameroon. But the human rights organizations did not see this case as part of the human rights discourse. I'm going to get to some human rights treaties in a minute, but what we were finally able to find was a prisoner rights organization, an organization that goes into the prisons and provides food and medical care to prisoners. They were willing to provide food because in a lot of countries, if your family doesn't bring you food to the prison, you don't eat. There's no, mess hall. Prison conditions are bad for everyone. And because these men had been rejected by their families, and because their families were both ashamed and afraid, and because their friends, other LGBT people, were afraid to come to the prison for fear that they would be detained, there was no one to provide these men with food. So they were hungry, they were being abused within, detention. And so we did finally find one human rights organization that was willing, as long as we were very quiet about it, and as long as we didn't announce it publicly that they were helping, they were willing to go to the prison and make sure that these 11 men had food to eat most of the time. The men finally, there was a long process. The men finally went to trial. 9 of them were convicted and 2 were acquitted. And we had no idea why 9 were convicted, 2 were acquitted. It made no sense. The only thing we could figure out was that some people had been able to pay, whatever was needed to grease the wheels. Others had not. No witnesses were called. They were not caught in flagrante delicto. They were not observed having sex. So there was no case against them. But still, 9 of them were convicted and sentenced to a year and a half in prison. And they had already served that, so they were released shortly thereafter. But what that shows is that there's a major problem around fair trial. For everyone, but particularly for LGBT people, as the trial had no legal basis, and it was clearly just a trial for show. And that's what we fear about the case of Stephen and Tulonge, who were just held over for trial in Malawi today. They will be prosecuted based on the media and based on popular sentiments about their relationship and about their gender identity. So fair trial and prison conditions, as I mentioned. After the men were released, and there was a photo of Ali Mongosh, who was one of the men. He died within a week after his release. He was HIV positive when he went into prison, we're pretty sure. He received no treatment while in detention. The conditions would very difficult, and he died within a week of his release. So there's also a big problem in terms of prison conditions. So I just talk about that case just to give you some sense of one of the main issues that people contend with, which is arbitrary arrest and detention. But it's not the only one. There are across the board human rights violations related to housing, related to education, people being thrown out of schools, people being thrown out of their homes when they're discovered to be LGBT, people facing violations of the right to health. But we'll get to those in a minute. But I want us to speak specifically about the situation for lesbian and bisexual women, because most human rights violations against women don't happen in the public arena, I would say. Arbitrary arrest is something mainly that's experienced by men, but women face discrimination and violence more often, I would say, within, not that women don't get arrested, because they do. The two lesbian women who were arrested on their way to the Coalition of African Lesbian Conference, they were leaving Kigali, and they were asked where they were going, and I think their papers were a little bit too explicit, and they spent several weeks in detention and had their passports confiscated. So women are arrested, but quite often the behavior of women is policed in the home. You get to this, women don't even have the space to get to the street, to get to activism in terms of their sexual orientation, their gender expression. But women are policed in the home, they're policed in the community, they're policed by the church, they're policed by men in the community who are unhappy with their behavior. And one of the best examples are the best examples that have been documented is the high number of what are referred to as corrective, curative rapes that have been well documented in Southern Africa and South Africa specifically. Situations in which groups of men, sometimes men even within the family, feel that they have the right or the responsibility to change a woman's behavior, her sexual orientation, or her gender identity and expression through rape. And that is something that the number of groups in South Africa have documented really well and has been shown to be pretty widespread. One of the best known cases is the case of Wilisa Mulane, who was a South African woman, actually a very well-known South African woman. She was a member of the South African women's football team. And she was raped, beaten, and stabbed 25 times in Parktown, which is a township in Johannesburg. Unlike in many previous cases, and there are dozens and dozens of cases of South African women, lesbian, bisexual, or just women who are, gender variant in their behavior, who have been raped, beaten, and killed. But in this case, finally, there was a trial, and 4 of the suspected attackers went on trial. One of them pled guilty and was sentenced to 32 years. Another was convicted, and 2 others were acquitted. And the challenge around that case was that the courts still refused to admit or acknowledge that it was a hate crime. That the fact that this woman was, and it was clear through the testimony of a number of the men who were on trial that it was a specific targeting of her because of her sexual orientation. And the courts in South Africa were still not willing to make that step and acknowledge the violence against lesbians and bisexual women as being worth looking at specifically because of the category, social category that these women fall into. So, I could go on talking about cases, but what I'd rather do is talk a bit about the basis of our work and how we make the arguments that we make. Because we make these arguments from a human rights perspective. We use moral arguments, but the first argument we use is a legal argument. The fact that states have responsibilities to their citizens, and those responsibilities can't be, particularly the responsibilities to ensure the right to life, the right to be free from torture, those sorts of things, they're non-negotiable. And the LGBT people and those presumed to be LGBT have the same set of rights as everyone else. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just show you And a lot of you are professionals in this field, so I'm going to bore you, but I'm sorry. But that's why, for those who aren't, I just wanted to maybe give you copies of the Universal Declaration, and we can talk about this a bit. Enough. There you go. Okay, so the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, shortly after World War II. The world had just gone through a horrible period. People had been targeted based on their religion, based on their sexual orientation, based on their race, and the world said, nunca más, enough, we have to do some, we have to make a real sea change here. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. Now, the Universal Declaration, enough, we have to do some, we have to make a real sea change here. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not binding international law. What it is a statement of principles. But there is binding law that's attached to the Universal Declaration, which are a number of treaties, but probably the two most significant for our purposes would be the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And I have copies which people can have, but it's usually better just to work with the Universal Declaration because it's simpler, and you kind of have to, if you haven't studied either of the other treaties, then it's hard to just be introduced to them kind of quickly. But basically, these two treaties, which are based on the Universal Declaration, so they take the principles of the Declaration and they make them law. The question is, it's a big question. Somebody maybe always, how binding is international law anyway? I mean, one of the main principles of the United Nations is that states are sovereign, and that, only very, very exceptional cases can one state override the sovereignty of another state. Does anyone know what those cases might be?
Genocide?
Yeah, that's probably the one that everyone really kind of agrees on this. If a state is committing genocide, another state has the right to take action. But short of that, there's really, the states agree to kind of abide by these treaties, and there are mechanisms for, holding states accountable, but in terms of a police force that could go in and, sort of say, stop, torturing people or stop arresting people, that's not the way international law works. But anyway, I just wanted to, make sure you had a copy of the Universal Declaration. It is, the basis of, on which we operate, all the human rights movement operates. It has the things in it that you would expect. Article 3. Could you read Article 3? Could you read Article 3 for us? Yes, I'm going to get you involved.
Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person.
Right, that's the most basic one. It's the one you can never abrogate, even if someone is, even if you're in a situation of war, even if, you're in a situation of, disease and, making public health arguments about, abrogating other parts of this treaty, you can't, of this set of principles, you can't change that. How about number 5?
No one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment.
Right, you can't torture people. You can't torture people for any reason. You can't torture them because they have a politically different approach, because they're a member of a different political party, because they are black and under apartheid, you have a particular political agenda that this person is, has a different point of view. You can't torture anyone for any reason. The two I just want to draw your attention to, which probably have the most relevance they all are very relevant, as you'll see, but with regard to LGBT rights, is Article 2. Article 2 and 12. Mark, could you read 2?
Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory in which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty.
Okay. All right. So there are a couple of really key words in here, and I'm really simplifying things a bit, but sex. Okay. When it was written, the framers were probably not talking about sexual orientation, but they were talking about gender, if you will. But these treaties, well, this is a statement of principle. It's meant to evolve. Many things were not thought of when the drafters were thinking about this. So the term sex, we interpret it, and it has been interpreted by UN treaty bodies to include sexual orientation and gender identity, all issues related to sex and gender. And then the other one, of course, is other status, in which the drafters left it open so that in an acknowledgement that there would be other groups of people who needed specific protections. We count ourselves under that group. And then, of course, the other article that we use to make our case is Article 12.
No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks.
Right. No one shall interfere with my right to privacy. What I do, and privacy writ large, what I do in my home, the privacy of my identity, the privacy of, how I define myself. No one shall interfere with that. The state can't interfere with that. So those are the two main arguments that, are used in most international law debates around providing protections, but they're all really relevant. And I want to show you by asking you to do a short exercise. This is going to take a little bit of thinking, a little bit of reading, if you don't mind. But we'll try and go through these kind of quickly and then open it up.
Can I pour some wine?
You please. Absolutely do.
Better.
So what I'm going to ask is for everyone to take one of these little paragraphs, read it out loud, and then we'll all do a little search here in the Universal Declaration. And we'll sort of, or maybe take a minute first and just do a quick perusal of the Universal Declaration, particularly Articles 1 through 1 through 20.
Like a red wine?
Oh, thank you. Just take a few minutes and take a look at it. just FYI, take a look at Article 16. Men and women of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. The family is the natural fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. And it doesn't say men and women of full age have the right limitation due to race, nationality, or religion have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. The family is the natural fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. And it doesn't say men and women of full age have the right to marry each other. It just says they have the right to marry. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Okay, great. So let's look at the list, and maybe let's just go around the room, and if everyone could just read out loud your paragraph. Doug, why don't you start?
Just
first paragraph.
June 1976. That's actually when I was born, June 1976. Black
Me too.
Good answer. Black students in townships throughout South Africa demanded educational instruction in the Afrikaans language. The police and security forces respond to the mostly peaceful protests with a violent crackdown. Hundreds are wounded, dozens are killed, and schools are closed for months.
Okay. Real situation, obviously. So if we were arguing this, we were going to challenge the South African government back in June 1976. What arguments, what articles of the Universal Declaration? We'd probably use the various treaties, but if we were going to, use the Universal Declaration, what would we argue? Which articles would we argue?
Starting with the situation.
Yes?
Exactly. I was explaining Peaceful Assembly Association.
Okay. Why?
Well, because these folks were peacefully protesting, and they were rounded up and they were stopped. So, they created an association themselves in order to protest against the forces, and they were stopped, which is a violation.
Freedom of assembly, that's right. The South African government was violating its commitment. It's not that the United States said to South Africa, you have to commit to this. South Africa committed to it. They're part of the United Nations, they committed to it, they're violating that article. What else?
19, freedom of opinion and expression.
Right. Freedom of opinion and expression. They were expressing their opinion non-violently. What else?
I always go back to 3.
3's a good one.
Life and liberty.
Right to life. You can't kill me because I'm protesting. Okay.
That's my favorite.
Okay, that's a good one. That and torture are the only two that can, is that right? That and torture are the two that can never be abrogated. That can never be, even in a situation of war, in a situation of, there are times when rights can be curtailed. In public health crisis, for example, though it's arguable, it should never be for very long, it should never be, it should always be measured in ways that those two can never be abrogated. Okay, next.
In 2003, ranking members of the NDC, the Constitution Party, including its leader, Morgan Chandrabani, accused of plotting the murder of the president and charged with treason, an offense punishable by death. No tangible evidence presented that any such plot took place, and the prosecution calls them incredible witnesses.
Okay, that's Zimbabwe. I didn't put that. Needed that. Okay, so what Articles of the Universal Declaration are being violated. What's 11? Can you read it?
I will charge the criminal offense of the right to be presumed innocent of doing guilty according to law. No one shall be held guilty of any penalties of the act of
Well,
no, maybe not.
No, that wasn't. How about,
Well, I mean, I guess you could be.
I mean, he wasn't presumed guilty.
how about 9?
9 is one of them. There was no evidence for his arrest, and that's what's called arbitrary arrest and detention. When you were arrested arbitrarily. But let me ask you a question. If let's take Cameron, okay, these 11 men were arrested. There is a law in Cameron. There's a sodomy law in Cameron. Okay, so was that, and these men were arrested under that sodomy law. Would that still be considered arbitrary arrest?
Yes.
Why?
Because they weren't seen, because that the Lord said they had to be seen doing outside.
Good answer. Good answer. But not quite right.
It depends how the law is drafted. Because what do you call sodomy? I mean, it could be the I'm not sure what the law in Cameroon, but there might be some laws, some sodomy laws, which would define sodomy as the advertising. I mean, the advertising of...
Well, let's take right here in the United States. Let's take, what was his name? Hardwick. What was his first name? Chris Hardwick. Okay. He was caught in the act.
Yes.
Okay. Would his arrest under international law, would his arrest be considered arbitrary? There's a law, there's a sodomy law, okay, in the United States. There is a, he was caught in the act.
Well, he was the Harvard case.
Right.
And he was the reason on the rock. But we were, the part of that case was, in Georgia at the time, the neighbor complained, because he and his partner were having sex, and said they made too much noise, and the police came in and arrested them for having sex in their house, and that was the case. And people said you can't come into somebody's house, but in Georgia at the time you could, and that's why we went over to the Supreme Court.
And that's why it was arbitrary.
Right.
Okay. I mean, even if a country has a law, and if the law itself violates international human rights principles, being arrested under the law is still considered arbitrary arrest. I mean, and that's what the Supreme Court eventually found, is that, you know, the right to privacy had been violated in their case, and the right to non-discrimination was part of the argument. And the major case that the case that the Human Rights Committee decided, which was the case of Tunin v. Australia, found that that sodomy laws in and of themselves violate the rights to privacy and the rights to non-discrimination. So even if the United States had a sodomy law, even if Chris Hardwick was caught in the act, it was still an arbitrary arrest, and hence we have a change in our laws. Not that long ago. Okay, great. Good, but again, I go back to George, well, for this number 2, I go back to George's number 3, the right to life. If you're sentencing someone to death, then probably it's a violation of the right.
A little bit.
Okay, a little bit. Okay, 3.
Wambira is fired from his job as a secondary school teacher when his name and address is printed on a list of individuals purported to be gay or lesbian by a Ugandan newspaper, Black Mamba. Until then, his job performance had been exemplary.
Okay, which rights are being violated here? Anyone?
12.
Okay, can you read it, please?
No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference of his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor or reputation. anyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks.
Now, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. Why? Do you want to say why?
No, I'm saying.
You agree? Thank you very much. That's what you well, hold on now. But see, you as a media person, that's right.
Actually, that's what the paper did. But the paper didn't take its job. So I was looking for work. 23.
Okay.
23.
Everyone has the right to work.
Right.
To free choice of employment and to just and favorable conditions of work and to the protection against unemployment. However, this, I mean,
and also Article 25, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for their health. I mean, he's being fired from his job, he's being denied adequate
So
standard of
because
living.
they fired him, the other things fall into place.
Right. But
without the
job, he's no longer.
Without the, how do you say in English, just, I mean, like when you're fired without the just cause.
Right. But let's go back to the issue of privacy in terms of the publication of this list of names, because these are real cases.
Well, I'm not saying privacy, I think his reputation had been, because he went back to his job and the school got rid of him because of, not even improving or not, because his reputation has been sullied.
Right.
So now he's no longer, that's why I picked that one, because of his reputation. He can't go back to work there because now people think of him differently.
I'm thinking Article 20, again, for association, the right to association.
How so?
Because he's, belonging to, or a part of a group of people, or he's associating with a community of people. A larger community at large, and he's being arrested.
Yeah. I probably wouldn't use that. I probably wouldn't use that argument because you always want to use the strongest argument and like the argument that's going to really move people and get people on your side. I mean, here's a man who's doing his job, not hurting anybody. Next thing you know, his name is published in a newspaper and his address, and he loses his job. His livelihood has been taken away from him. He's probably if it's in Uganda, he's probably now in physical danger. So his bodily integrity his right to life is being threatened. But the issue I want to raise, and you as a media person, I want to particularly raise is, this issue of publishing people's names or in newspapers or, it's a tricky one because there is also a right to freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And, we have trouble sort of, arguing that the press,
he takes liberties with that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, as a human rights group, we have trouble, sort of trying, making statements that would be seen as curtailing the freedom of the press, and sometimes those things are better handled in civil issues, civil situations.
Here in America,
slander or libel cases, as opposed to, we try to bring newspapers in Nigeria, for example, challenge their ethics. It's more an issue of ethics.
Right. And here in America, specifically, the Detroit Free Press was known for doing that. They would put in that I had a scandalous relationship with X, Y, and Z, and they put my name and address in the newspaper. People were having fits about it. And a lot of other papers didn't do it because they were saying, because ethically it's really bad. Not only, and they didn't wait until it was proven or not, like, you got court coming out with his pants on his knees and blah, 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 and all kinds of stuff. And folks were always talking about how bad this newspaper was. Because I remember the first time I went to a National Black Justice, the National Association of Black Journalists, in Detroit, and they talked about this newspaper and how bad this newspaper was, and they would put people's names and addresses, people who were affairs, divorces, alleged child abuse, HIV. They didn't care, and people would always criticize this newspaper, and they would use the freedom of the press, and it was always a very narrow line of whether or not people respected this newspaper or not. But they would do it, not like because when I first heard about it, we were always shocked that they wouldn't actually do this.
Right.
But it was like, they do this and they were saying, this is not a third world country, this is right here in America, in Detroit, that they were doing this on a regular basis.
Right.
So I think we do think that newspapers should have some ethical kind of moral compass.
Right.
They wouldn't do that, but some of them do.
Many do not have any kind of moral compass.
What were some of the arguments that the Nigerian paper gave you? Was it the same sort of freedom of speech?
Freedom of speech, that they had a responsibility to protect the community from these, child molesting, homosexuals, that, basically that they were free to, write and report as they wanted to. And frankly, we didn't challenge that except when it came to printing the address of people or printing where people work, because and our argument is, that when you have to balance rights, there is such a thing as balancing rights. The one thing that always takes precedence is the right to life, and the right to and related to that, the right to be free from torture and ill treatment. And when you say George B. is in Uganda is a homosexual and is molesting your children, okay, and lives on Bainbridge Street and works at, you basically sort of said, go attack him. I mean, I wish we had a computer in here because I'd love for you to see this. We should get a chance to go to projectc.com, one word, projectc.com. It is a website that mainly targets people in Kenya, but it's run from Georgia. Interesting.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and have you seen it?
No,
Sally? It has photos of Kenyan gay lesbian activists on it. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to print those photos out, okay, and put them up in buses. It instructs you, print these photos out, put them up in buses and around walls in Nairobi. And the guys the men and women who are, Kenyan activists whose pictures on them are terrifying. One of the guys told me that he gets every time before he gets on the bus, he looks around, he needs to make sure his picture's not up on the bus. Every time someone looks at him for too long. So, here you have a situation where there is a conflict of rights, but the right to freedom of expression does not trump his right to life or physical safety.
Cary, can I ask you a question? With this, so say someone comes to you guys and says, my name appears on this list.
Right.
How do you go about, I see how the article, it's against, it's dishonor against the person's reputation. But then you're basically, so that person comes to you and says, I am gay, but I don't want this to be public information. You see what I mean?
Right.
Because to say, okay, this is an attack against his honor, then it means, are you disavowing the fact that this man is gay, or?
It's a real challenge.
Yeah.
First of all, it can't be really handled in a human rights framework unless the magazine or the newspaper is saying, go harm him. I mean, if they're just saying, we're printing his name or her name because, it happens to women as much as to men, because we want the community to know. There's no real human rights argument there. I mean, the ethics board of the media in that country should address it. But, human rights basically holds states accountable, okay, not private actors. The only time, states have a responsibility to protect you from private actors, but human rights holds states responsible. And so your name is printed in the newspaper, it's not a good thing, and the state has a responsibility to protect you from anyone who would want to do you harm as a result of it. But the media, that fourth estate, it's a tricky one. The state can't fire you from your job because of it, though they will certainly try. They shouldn't arrest you, though they may do that. And while we're on Uganda, let me just, a number of you have mentioned Uganda. I probably don't need to tell you about it. It's been one of the most publicized LGBT rights issue ever. I think the level of attention that it has gotten in the international media and from various governments, unfortunately not African governments where the real pressure could, be applied and have some different kind of impact. It's been unprecedented. The Uganda government is considering government where the real pressure could, be applied and have some different kind of impact. It's been unprecedented. The Uganda government is considering right now debating this anti-homosexuality bill. It's called Just that will make pretty much all LGBT relationships punishable by death, because there is this aggravated homosexuality clause and this, what's the term, habitual. You're a habitual offender, which I am. I don't know if that's the rest of y'all, but I offend whenever. So we would all be subjected to the death penalty under this law. So we don't have much time. So
can I ask a question about this one?
Sure.
Does this mean that it's significant that if this school was a public school as opposed to a private school for your intervention?
Is that what you mobilized in your intervention?
You're asking a question. What did we actually do in this situation?
No.
No. Your question. Yeah. No. I mean, I think it would matter. I mean, the right to a livelihood, the right to work. It doesn't matter what the institution is. I mean, I think that activists in Uganda probably, well, it would, because there's no protection.
The Universal Declaration of Rights applies to states.
Right.
So it would seem that your arguments would be different if it's a public school.
I mean, I think your argument would be more direct if it were a public institution, or if this person works for the government, but the government would still have the responsibility under labor law to protect this individual, even if she or he were working for a private institution. I mean, it's interesting because, like here in the States, for example, as we try and get ENDA passed and get other sorts of rights around labor, the president can, sign a decree saying that, people who work for the government are already protected. But it takes more, legislation and more work to have those protections extended to the private sector. But under international law, it's the same thing. You have the right not to face discrimination. Do you disagree with another point of view on it?
Well, I was just remembering back to the dispute around Cracker Barrel, and they had sent a letter out saying fire all the gay employees, and they got away with that in states where there was no anti-discrimination laws.
Right. And see, that's why we as a movement, and I think IGLHRC has a role to play, needs to be using international law to hold both the United States government, state governments, and private actors here in the United States accountable. Because who cares what U.S. domestic law says? Bottom line is there's a higher principle, which is international law, and Cracker Barrel was liable under that. And so, but we're very civil rights focused here in the United States. We hold ourselves kind of above international law, and we very seldom deploy international law in our domestic human rights struggles, which is something that my organization would like to do a better job at.
The dissenting powers behind it use international law.
Yeah.
The majority in overturning powers behind it used it.
Lawrence, Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, we reference it, some jurists reference it, but we need to, for example, all the treaty bodies that the United States is part of. I mean, the United States is a signatory to a number of treaties, the Torture Convention, ICCPR, and they go and they report and they don't talk about, the way they treat trans people in prison in this country, or, the way young people of color, are still, victimized in the streets of our cities, and no one holds them accountable. No one. We'll hold Uganda accountable. We'll hold the Philippines accountable, but the United States just kind of gets off easy. We don't use the international mechanisms. Okay. This next one's an interesting one. Sally, could you repeat that?
Jose M. Mozambican university student, and Carlos is no roommate, enter into a romantic relationship. When Carlos fails to find money to pay his tuition fees. He threatens that he will tell the police that Jose gave him alcohol and drugs and raped him, unless Jose agrees to pay university fees on his behalf. Jose refuses. A few days later, Jose is taken into custody for several days until friends intervene and pay police officers to get him released. Upon return to the university, Jose finds that he has been expelled by the rector because of the allegations related to his sexuality.
Okay, that was chock full.
This one's tough.
Chock. This one's tough. All right. Take a minute.
First of all, when he calls it that, just
you want to say Carlos? Which one, Carlos or Jose?
Carlos.
All right.
That was terrible. Okay. Article 9. Arbitrary arrest, detention, and exile.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know what else.
How about, anyone else? How about Article 26? I know I said stop at 21 or 26. Yeah. Everyone has the right to education. Okay. That means that queer people have the right to education too. You can't throw me out. You know, we worked on a case.
You got to spell, that's right. Yeah.
Right. We worked on a case of a young trans, I don't know if this person, Jose actually defined as trans, but Jose was thrown out of school because, so they carried a purse and used the girls' bathroom and was, you know, in people's minds was gender man. So, you know, I mean, was thrown out of school and released. So we addressed the Ministry of Education, letter writing campaign, and the groups and Billy's worked on it and got Jose back to school. But LGBT people around the world regularly face violations of the right to education, particularly trans people face, young trans folks face it, and particularly at the secondary school level, we find that, you know, it's gender expression. It really, you know, is more an issue than sexual orientation, but people sort of make it through kind of elementary school. You know, you're not too, you know, people aren't too aware of your variants, and then you get to high school, and you know, then it's all, you know, becomes a problem, and people, you know, particularly, you know, trans people just can't take the bullying, and just like in the United States, and stop going to school, or families stop, you know, have to choose which kids they're gonna keep in school because they have to pay school fees, and so the kids who are considered to be different and expendable and less valuable to the family are the ones who don't get to school. Or young people end up having to, you know, to be trans women end up turning to, you know, to sex work. And so, you know, it's incompatible to be going to school and sex work at the same time, and for a lot of people. So the right to education is a big issue. And of course, that's a cycle, because you're denied the right to education, you're therefore denied the right to earn an adequate standard of living. You get often involved in careers that are marginal, and then you get arrested, and then you're exposed to healthcare risks, and you're exposed to sexual violence, and, you know, a whole kind of cycle of abuse, which is why these rights are so interlinked. Okay, great. Horacio.
Shall I read?
Please.
The home of human rights activist Victor Mukasa was raided by local officials. Papers, videos, and other documentation related to LGBT organizing in East Africa are confiscated. Mukasa's house guest, Yvonne Oko, is taken into custody by the authorities. Oyo is verbally abused, at one point forced to strip to prove that she's a woman.
Now, this case is very close to my heart. Sally has met Victor. Victor works for us in our South Africa office. And is really one of the leaders of the transgender movement in Africa. So, Victor works for us in our South Africa office. And is really one of the leaders of the transgender movement in Africa. So,
Oyo was tortured.
Yeah, I mean, the term, this is a good point you're raising. Torture, yeah. I mean, generally, I think we probably would use the term ill treatment, though torture includes ill treatment, cruel and human degrading treatment. Sometimes I hesitate about using the word torture because people associate torture with,
physical
screws to, extreme pain. But it includes,
forced to strip.
Right, but I mean, and it's interesting, that's one of the issues that we want to push on, is that, is being forced to strip to prove your gender to an authority. It's extremely humiliating, psychologically damaging. We know that here in the United States, transgender people face strip searches regularly in detention. So, yeah, it's a violation of the right to be free from torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. What else?
My standard number 3.
Why? It should be, no one's being killed, right?
No.
Not yet.
Okay.
17?
Right.
Okay. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of this property. Right. And of course, the right to privacy. Okay. The last one. Yes. Did you? Who would like to do the Mark? Okay.
In Pakistan, Ali Khan learns that his daughter is in love with another young woman. He locks her in the house for more than a month, beats her, and then arranges for her marriage to a distant cousin who lives in a neighboring village.
Happens all the time. Young women.
A woman was killed last week in Córdoba in Argentina by her partner's stepfather, right?
By her partner's stepfather. Right.
Shot him with a big shotgun.
Well, this is number 16.
16.
Your marriage shall be only with a free and full consent from intending spouses.
Right. Forced marriages happen. It happens to gay men and to lesbians, but gay men have more freedom. They have more freedom to refuse. They have more freedom to delay. And even within the marriage, once it happens, once it's consummated, gay men have more space to then go, do their thing and live their lives. But women really, are locked in. We had this horrible circumstance. This Egyptian woman who came and met with us, who talked about basically being imprisoned, in a marriage that her family had, forced her into. I mean, some of the stuff you'd expect, being beaten, being, not allowed to speak or express her opinion, but it was the psychological piece that seemed like the worst for her. The fact that she ran away, like she saved the money, she, quietly bought a plane ticket, and she had to leave her children. And that was like, then that's one of the things that men and the family use to keep women locked in these kinds of relationships is, you'll never see your children again. So.
Also 2 and 3, it's a question of her sex and he's being deprived of her liberty.
2 and 3, I'm sorry, Mark said it again?
2 and 3. It's a question of her sex and she's being deprived of her liberty because she's in love with somebody of her own sex.
Right. And she's been deprived of liberty, and then he locks her, and he locks her, and the house basically detains her. Now, he's not a state, okay, but the state has the responsibility to make sure that no one's deprived of their liberty, even in the context of a family or a community. Or, and I'm sure people are hearing stories about churches, both here in the United States and abroad, that, find out someone's gay, lock them in, perform exorcisms, that sort of thing. So, right. So this was just to give you a bit of a sampling of some of the human rights violations that people are experiencing in different parts of the world, and the ways in which we argue those violations. And I say that our movement is changing. I was mentioning this to Doug, and for the last 20 years that we've been doing this work, I think, at least during the first 10, the movements in a lot of parts of the world were not real visible, even in their own countries. I mean, the movements in Latin America really were probably the most kind of developed and really coming on strong, and really now have a lot to teach us about, how to fight for their rights. I mean, I was with some of the activists from Colombia over the last weekend, where they have achieved conjugal visits with same-sex couples and presidents. And, no country has a better legislative framework than South Africa around adoption rights, around same-sex marriage, of course, around inheritance, that sort of thing. So the movements throughout the world are growing, they're becoming more visible, they've achieved some successes that we haven't achieved. So there really is a lot for us all to teach each other, and to learn from each other. And my organization is sort of trying to find its role now in, a global movement that's not so centered here in the North as we once thought of it to be. And how we, help support and lift up the voices of local partners, and, what's our role? So it's an evolving kind of question. I don't really have an answer.
I was about to ask you that question.
What's the answer?
No, yeah, I was going to answer that question. Because oftentimes in presentations, students, they're always asking them, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, you can donate, you can intern with me, you can, sign petitions, you can do these things. But they always ask me, and I never have a good answer. So I was hoping that you might have.
I do have a good answer to that. That's go to our website. And I say that because what we do is we spend a lot of time working with partners around the world to help let them tell us what needs to happen. Senegal's a tricky one because the movement in Senegal is very young. But you got other countries where the movements are very strong and are very good at saying, okay, here's what you do. You write to the government about the dozens of people who've been killed in Honduras since the coup d'etat, or you demand, the release of prisoners in Cameroon. So, and a lot of those actions can be found on our website. Some of them you just click, so like move on, lists like that, you click and you take action. Right now we're asking people to write letters and cards to the couple that's been detained in Malawi because their spirits are very low right now after having had their case bound over for trial. But even more than trying to raise their spirits is letting the guards in that prison see hundreds of letters and cards pouring in to those two individuals, so they know not to mistreat them, not to let the other prisoners mistreat them. These are people that the rest of the world, cares about, even though their families have abandoned them. One of the things we're trying to do actually is we're trying to help the movement in Malawi to go talk to the parents of not just the parents, but the families. Because the families are afraid, they don't understand, everything was kind of okay, now it's not okay. And it's not like all of a sudden, T-Wonga became transgender. It happened yesterday. But all of a sudden, the world, the media is looking at it, the government's arrested them, so they're scared. This is like, local kind of thing, And so one of the things we're trying to help the local group there in Malawi is go talk to the family. And say, like, these are your children. You don't want to just abandon them like this. We're trying to find priests, because this is a very religious society, to go with the queer folk and, go to the family and say, look, we know this is tricky, it's challenging, but, could you come to the prison? We'll come with you. We'll pay for, just for your transportation to get there. To try and create some support for Stephen and Tuonge. You should see them. I mean, when you go, the Guardian has the great footage. I mean, and it's so interesting because every time I see it, they have you seen it? The footage of them going back and forth to court. And Tuonge is the trans woman, though she does not, I guarantee you she doesn't define as trans. I guarantee you, she defines as woman. And it's really interesting to see because Tuonge, she carries herself with this pride. Like, you know, she's walking out of the courtroom, people are screaming and throwing stuff at her, but she's just got this kind of like, I am what I am. Stephen, he seems a little more affected, frankly, by the whole thing, and you know, but so I mean that's what we're asking people to do right now, is to write cards and letters to them.
How is the movement been effective? Been doing on the ground? Are people able to actually go and talk to them in the prison? They actually go to the families and not be picked up themselves and arrested? Like how has it been organizing?
Do you know? Well, it's effective organizing. It had a terrible effect on organizing. The offices of SEDA, which is the Gay and Lesbian Organization, which functioned, by the way, not as a gay and lesbian organization, but as an HIV service organization. Because public health, you know, HIV is the angle at which you can do this quote-unquote MSM, men who have sex with men, work, you know, with some level of cover. And so the SEDA was the organization that is the LGBT group and have a drop-in center and they do testing, mainly for MSM, but they also say that they work for sex workers. So they can say we do sexual rights kind of stuff. And their offices have been raided twice since the arrest. They had you know, condoms and lube and dildos and that kind of thing that they use for HIV what do you call it? Presentations, right? And that stuff was all confiscated. A few of them were arrested. They're now out on bail, but Stephen and Tiwongi are still in detention. But Victor, our staff member, and Fatsai, you know Fatsai, don't you? Mubarosa from Gays and Lesbians of Zimbabwe. They went to Malawi and they went to the prison 5 times. You you go, you pay your little ride, and they let you in. And you go. I think if I went or you went, it would probably be a problem. But them as Africans, I think they were able to kind of, you know, and do it as, you know, how it is. So,
but they're still Africans, they're not from Malawi.
You know, you're right. And also Victor's pretty, yeah. I still think it's better for Africans to do it than for an American to do it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, so I think so I guess, you know, there is some access to the prison. Yeah.
Time for one quick specialized question. How does IGLHRC work overlap with some of the other projects of the human rights organizations like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch? Or I guess look at this
I mean, ILGA, you know, is a membership organization, but they definitely do action orders. I mean, we try and work as best we can collaboratively. I mean, Amnesty, as you know, for a long time did not consider LGBT people who had been detained to be prisoners of conscience. I mean, I guess it was in like 1995 or something like that they finally. So they've been doing it for a while. But I mean, we a lot of times they have better access than we do. I mean, an organization like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, they have staff in almost every, you know, in half the countries of the world. They have people who literally live there and work there. So they have access to information that we just don't have access to. I mean, these are these are people who are not working on LGBT rights issues per se, but they're working on human rights issues. And we want to be part of a larger human rights discourse. You know, we want to make the links between our rights and other, for example, prisoner rights. You know, the ways in which people are treated in prisons around the world are unacceptable, whether these are LGBT people or not. And so there's all these links. I mean, we want to be working also with groups that are working on right to life and working for, you know, abortion rights, because the way the religious right in the United States is pumping money into, you know, homophobic activities and projects, like literally sending members of Exodus International to Uganda to speak at conferences. They're doing the same thing in terms of fighting, you know, the right to choose, the right to abortion services. So the movements are very linked. I think we could all do a better job of working together. I mean, there is competition, and there's competition for grants, you know. You know, and so there's a tendency to sort of be a little more, a little less cooperative, I think, sometimes than we should be. I'll give you an example. You know, when Uganda, the Human Rights Campaign put out an appeal on Uganda a few months ago, and well, maybe I should say so the camera, but it was a little surprising, you know, given that they don't work on international issues, and you know, there hadn't been a lot of communication back and forth about it. But I mean,
wasn't there some bill for the U.S. House
yes.
Representative?
Yes, and that was the rationale for doing it, and ultimately it was a good thing for them to do. They could mobilize.
You're talking about Human Rights Watch?
Yeah, no, Human Rights Campaign.
Interesting.
Yeah. Did I say Human Rights Watch?
No,
I said. Right. Right. Yeah. But in any case, I mean, Human Rights Campaign can mobilize, you know, tens of thousands of their members very quickly to take action. And yes, there was a bill. There was a bill that was Coburn and. Co-sponsor was, but to condemn the government of Uganda for this bill, and Human Rights Campaign was able to mobilize their membership to encourage other members of Congress to sign on to it. So the more the merrier. It's just a question of us working in a coordinated fashion. So listen, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Hope.